Welcome back to Left Anchor. I'm Ryan Cooper, and it's just me today. No Alexi. He is out gallivanting, having more fun than I am probably. But I do have a special guest, Sarah Tabor, who is the proprietor of the YouTube channel Farm to Tabor. Hey, see what you did there. And also a farmer. And I just happened to stumble across your YouTube channel the other day, and it was very interesting. And it seemed like, fairly, reasonably well evidenced stuff you're talking about, and sort of the typical YouTube fashion of being incredibly inflammatory about everything, doom and gloom, and the car market's going to collapse and AI is going to destroy everything. This was like, oh, wow, I've never even heard of a lot of this stuff. So anyway, welcome to the show, Sarah.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I can't take credit for the Farm to Tabor name. That was a friend of ours. And I was like, you know what? I can't do better than that. Thank you.
Yeah, well, you take the gifts where you can find them. Mm-hmm. The first thing I wanted to ask, just, because as someone from Utah, and I've sometimes described myself as fiscally socialist, but culturally Mormon, culturally Jack Mormon, maybe, is that you were raised LDS. And can you just tell us how that came about?
You get born and then your parents have the thing that they do,
Amazing.
Yeah, that's the story. I don't know. I didn't really set out to be like a Mormonism creator. I was like, I'm trying to do agriculture stuff, but the rise of the Mormon influencer is something people are really interested in. And I'm like, what about the rise of the ex-Mormon de-influencer? Because we're out here. No, I was really heavily involved because that's just kind of like your social life growing up. And I think it was useful in high school in a lot of ways. Went to BYU because there's we lived in Wisconsin at the time, and there's just a really heavy drinking culture out there.
Oh, yeah.
When they started introducing roundabouts to the Green Bay area, people go to town meetings and say, but you can't drive through them drunk like you can with an intersection. Like adults would say this at town meetings. So that's the environs, and your friends get really into drinking and you're like, but I just want to be a nerd and steady. We grew up, I didn't think of it as working class at the time, but looking back and getting to know the lives other people have been living, I was like, oh, we were working class, and I just really wanted to get myself financially settled before worrying about anything else. I didn't want to party. I was running scared. So yeah, BYU was cheap, and I wasn't going to spend a lot of money on booze. So that's kind of how that worked. Met my husband there, and yep. Now we're here. It's I'm not really telling faith exit stories. I'm just really focusing on the agriculture side of things because kind of going along with that, growing up, I was working on farms, along with other things, worked in a garment shop, worked in a lot of labs to work my way through college. So was always working alongside going to school, paid my, had to get scholarships and a job, to get through school, a little bit of support from the family. Again, realizing not everybody had to do that. I feel it's one of the last years of people who could go through college kind of working yourself through. I took summer jobs in a factory, paper mill stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of funny because to me, it was a summer job, and there's a big difference between someone who's actually a lifer in the factory versus someone who's I'm here for a summer job. But, once you are hanging out with folks who are in the thought leadership space, it's whoa, you worked in a factory once? Wow.
You've been in a factory? Yeah, no, I had a very similar story growing up and going to school. I went to a private liberal arts school, which ended up being dramatically cheaper than public school would have been in Colorado because my parents did not have a lot of money. And so I could basically pay for everything I owed working with my dad doing construction during the summer times. And yeah, there's definitely a sense of having, meeting people in Washington, D.C., where I lived for 8 years. And it was sort of like that Eddie Izzard joke, about royals. It's oh, you're a plumber. What on earth is that? But anyway, we're off track a little bit already. Sure. So I had you on to talk about agriculture because you were saying a lot of stuff that I had never heard of. I grew up in a fairly agricultural, and we can maybe sort of get to that, a part of Colorado, which has a lot of farms, quote unquote, a lot of land, which is designated as agricultural status. And, my own parents, for instance, have plot of land in Southwest Colorado, about 26 acres, and 20 acres of it they rent out to somebody who runs a couple of cows on it. And, they have a big side roll sprinkler system that was paid for by the government, basically to cut down on salt discharge into the Colorado River Basin, stop people flood irrigating so that we don't have to build a big plant at the border of Mexico to fulfill our treaty obligations. But so can you maybe start with a broad overview? So we have the tariffs, we have, a total cessation of soybean exports to China, which has a lot of farmers running scared, including I saw you post, I believe it was you posted Scott Bessent has thousands of acres of soybean farms. That's the Treasury Secretary, right? And at the same time, we have this mass deportation of undocumented immigrants and a fairly large number of documented ones, from what I understand, and even some U.S. citizens too. And folks like that do disproportionately tend to work in agriculture. So what's the status?
Sure. Yeah. So the farm worker deportation / a lot of it, deportation is a real legal process. This is just kidnapping people by the government,
Yeah.
In a lot of cases. So I don't even deign to call it deportation. That's a real legal process, which is not happening here in many cases. So that is for crops that are picked by hand, right? So the U.S. is kind of tends to lean away from that. We don't do a ton of that. There's a couple states, California and Florida, that do a lot of that, but by and large, the U.S. traditionally has imported a lot of fruits and veggies from Mexico, and that's become more the case over the last few decades. It's crazy because it's not a huge percentage of the U.S. farm sector by acreage, but it is a big percentage of it by in terms of money, right? So California is our top agricultural state by income, and that's because they grow a lot of fruits and veggies. Corn and soybeans can bring you $400 to maybe $800 an acre, depending on the prices at the time. Veggies, depending on the veggie, can bring $40,000 an acre. It's 100 times increase. And so, yeah. So, but you have to pay your workers, and it's more complicated because you have to hire people. And so it's something that not a lot of farmers are interested in doing. People will often blame weather, but that never stopped the Netherlands. I'll just kind of point out there's ways to get around that. Most developed countries in the world have gone big on greenhouses because that's how you get, you grow more produce per square foot, which means the people you're hiring to pick spend more of their time picking and less their time just walking from one plant to another, right? So this is your standard capitalism thing, right? When your costs of labor go up, you bring in more equipment and automation. And every developed country except the US has really gone in on that. And people always say, well, that's because of policy. Our policy really encourages grain and big scale acreage over vegetables. To which I would respond, farm policy does not fall out of the sky. We write it. Mostly the farm lobby writes it. So why does the farm lobby want to grow big acre grains instead of fruits and veggies? It's really the more salient question. I think there's a big habit that we have in the US of treating farmers as passive recipients of policy instead of they're the people writing it for the most part. Yeah, there's other people contributing things, but they are the single biggest voice in farm policy. So US farm policy kind of just reflects what the farm sector wants to do. This will come up later. So that's the hand-picked veggie side of things. Where we're talking about farm workers, getting rounded up and kicked out of the country. That's for those crops. It's fruits and vegetables. Some fruits and veggies can be picked by machine, but that's usually tomatoes are going to turn into spaghetti sauce because it doesn't matter if they get squished, when you pick them.
Right.
It's blueberries are going to be dried and put into granola. It's not the blueberries that you eat whole, at the store. So that's what those farm workers are doing generally is picking crops. Sometimes it's working in meat handling facilities, like meat processing. You don't see a lot of folks like us working in meat plants. It's a lot of immigration that's fueling those facilities. And then you wind up with conversations about there's a lot of times when people say we need to make farm jobs better. And the subtext is almost always so that white people will take them.
Yeah.
And I would argue jobs need to be worth having no matter who's doing them. Those are my colleagues. They're not human trash. They are in fact people who are doing hard work and deserve to get paid for it. It doesn't matter who's doing the job. It should be a real job. But that's kind of something that's stuck in my craw for a while. It's the way we talk. When we talk about making farm jobs better, the subtext is always so white people will take them. That's just an interesting thing I'd like to point out. The goal of all those deportations, as far as I can tell, we really focus on the deportations. What is going on? So we talk about undocumented farm labor. There is documented farm labor. That's the H-2A visa. So if you come to the U.S., the way our farm policy works is they want you to come in and get an H-2A visa. The H-2A visa is not, here's your ticket to enter the US and look for a job. It's a matchmaking service. So people who want to work will go to an embassy, say, I want to sign up for this. And then employers who want to hire immigrant workers will also get in touch with the US immigration infrastructure and say, I would like to apply for 20 workers. So it's a matchmaking service. And once you have your H-2A visa, it is tied to one employer. You can't leave. And I will just say for the record that when Saudi Arabia does that, we call it human trafficking.
Yeah.
Because then you can't leave no matter what they're doing, right? No matter what the working conditions are, no matter if they're cheating you, if they're beating you, it doesn't matter, you can't leave. In a lot of cases, employers will take passports. That's quite common. They're not supposed to, but they still do it because nobody's enforcing much in the H-2A program. One of the largest human trafficking busts in modern US history was in southern Georgia a couple years ago, 2021. It's hard to get a beat on the number of people, number of workers who are involved in there, but it's been going on for a few years, and the perpetrators have made something like $200 million.
Jesus.
So slavery is a big business. And every single one of the people in that ring was brought in legally through H-2A because they can't leave. So you can treat them however you want, and they can't leave. And even if like technically they can go to an embassy, like usually the boss lies to them. They're like, oh, if you call anybody, we'll get you blacklisted and you can't come back to the US and work. The other thing they do is they work with organized crime in Mexico, and they say, if you don't work hard enough, if you don't make us enough money, if you complain, we'll kill your wife. We'll beat your family. So there's a lot of that going on as well. That is part of why there's so much vetting when people are on their way from Mexico into the US, is to make sure that they're as free as possible from those ties. The farm sector didn't like that because it's some extra money, and so they just got that abandoned. There were a bunch of anti-slavery reforms to the H-2A system in 2021, and the farm sector didn't like it because it's going to make it harder for us to do business. And they never said it's because of anti-slavery provisions. They're just like, this is unnecessary red tape. And Trump rolled all that back in June of 2025. So there's been some other changes to the H-2A program as well. It's not just about getting rid of undocumented people. It's making sure that workers who come into the US are coming in through the H-2A system where they are a lot easier to control.
Yeah, exploit, pay very low wages. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think, it's cousin to the H-1B visa, which I don't think is quite so abusive, if only because like those type of skills are much rarer and therefore compensated a lot better. But it's still the same type of thing where you just have this pool of exploitable, disposable labor that you can coerce because you hold, the penalty of being deported over them. The boss, your status in the country is tied to this particular job. And so if you don't do what the boss says, you get deported. And it's just natural. Of course, you have all that sort of horrible stuff happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that can be controlled with good enforcement, but it's never really been a top priority, and it's been explicitly deprioritized under the Trump administration. So I've been trying to get this info in front of people because everyone's really focused on the ICE arrest, right? Because that's very public. It's very obvious that it's happening. H-2A workers are kind of like being kept on somebody's land in the middle of nowhere. And so you wouldn't know it's happening. And so what I found was if you just talk about it, it's very sad and boring and serious. And it's also not one of the hot button political topics, right? ICE arrests are a hot button political topic. Shutdown is a top political topic, and these for very good reason. But hey, there's slavery going on in the US, and Trump is making it easier, has been actually very tough to get across to people because they think they already know what's going on with farm labor. And so I had to make some had to try and make it funny by making some TikTok skits, and they did kind of well. So I need to go back and revisit that in a very serious way. But that's a tough one to document because you tell people hey, immigration is a problem. And they're like, yeah, ICE. And you're like, that is only half of it. That is kind of only the tip of the iceberg, as it were. And I think there's also some suspicion that people who are being taken to prisons like Alligator Alcatraz are going to be put to work in agricultural fields. And I think that's a pretty reasonable suspicion. Actually, I've worked on a lot of farm crews. And then a few days to a few weeks in, I find out I'm the only person there who's getting paid. My inmates are all working off a sentence. Or my inmates, sorry, I think my coworkers are all working off a sentence.
Yeah.
They're all inmates working off a sentence, which is a heck of a thing. Number one, a terrible situation for them. Number two, when that keeps happening at your job, you start thinking, where is my life going? Maybe we need to go back to school. But yeah, and one of them was with, in the state of Florida. I was working at University of Florida, actually, as a postdoc in the blueberry genetics and breeding program. We were breeding new varieties of blueberry, huge moneymaker for the state of Florida. But they used prison labor, just because that's how all the agricultural, that's how the the agricultural college sourced its labor. We had a research farm that they had to run, and it was in like 2014, 2015. So that was around the time there was a previous crackdown on immigration. Like a lot of Georgia was really into like, we're going to get rid of all the illegals at the time. And then nobody came to work the farms. They're like, oh no, this sucks. So Florida was kind of having its own version of that at the time. And they were like, well, we're an official state institution. We can't be caught using illegals. And so let's just get a bunch of prisoners instead. The thing that nobody tells you about prison labor is you talk about agricultural prison labor and people hear like, oh yeah, chain gangs, hardened criminals. No. Hardened criminals are the last people you want to put to work because they know how to punch better than you do. You give them a shovel, what do you think they're going to do with it? Chop your head off and run, right? They don't want to be there. And so even if you can get them to work, it's going to take a lot of wardens per laborer, right? And so you don't actually make money doing that. Hardened criminals are a liability, financially speaking. So the people they want for prison labor programs are, minor drug offenders. It's the kind of people that you can order to work and they'll be like, okay, they're trying. That's who you want in a prison labor program, right? And I found that was really how the state of Florida sold their prison labor program, was like, oh, this is rehabilitation. Like, we're going to make them work for, they don't get to eat for free. You don't either. So we're going to make these people work, and it's rehabilitation and it's job training. Well, how many jobs are there for manual labor and agriculture for Americans? What exactly do you think what's waiting for these people? Even if those jobs existed, what are you going to do? Oh yeah, I can give you a great reference from when I was in jail from my warden. It's just so ridiculous once you stop and think about it. So
it strikes me that the best type of prison labor you'd want is someone who's actually falsely convicted. And maybe that explains a lot of the behavior of the criminal justice system down in Florida. So you got, no, these people are all innocent. They're all totally feckless, easy to push around, mild, timid, not a murderer in the bunch. They're all just law-abiding citizens.
19-year-old stoners and Xbox kids, like they weren't dangerous to anybody or anything. I mean, like they were kind of maybe a little bit layabout, they all had a 2-year-old son somewhere that they, could have been working to support, but no, they were busy being in jail because the state was like, if we can just jail people for minor drug possession, then we get a free labor force that's very slow and doesn't know where their feet are, and they stomp all over everything after they plant it. I was like, God bless these guys.
But so yeah. Onto the tariffs again, though. So we've seen just like a collapse of farm commodity exports, soybeans, wheat, all the rest of it. This, you had a video on this that I think blew up in a quite satisfactorily fashion. It was, just talking about why, something like 80% of farmers probably voted for Trump. And this was a guy who said he is going to do exactly the thing that he's doing now. We're going to have trade wars with everyone. They're not going to make any sense. It's going to completely fuck up all of the farm export markets across the entire country. And we're going to deport all of your workers. And they said, yes, give me some of that. It seems a little self-defeating, but maybe it makes more sense than I originally thought, or maybe people made a bad bet. What's your explanation there?
Okay, so I can sort of answer some of that with a quick wrap up from the last thing. I will say that in the prison farm, there is one guy who did a really good job. He was Latino. He, as far as I understand, he got pulled over for driving without a license, and then wound up in jail because he couldn't afford a lawyer. And they called him the human zipper because we had all these like stoner Xbox kids who not dangerous to anybody. I was out with them in the fields like all day long by myself, and I never felt like, oh my God, I'm in danger. Like they're harmless, like not scary kids, but they also didn't know how to do outside work. This guy was an exception. It was we had just all these little furrows 6 inches apart that we had to drop baby blueberry plants into, just the next generation of blueberry crosses. And he was just zip. He was just so fast. He just covered whole areas of the field by himself. And after the day of work was over, some of my colleagues, some of the other people actually getting paid on the team, were talking to the wardens. They're like, he's great. Can we have him back again tomorrow? We love him. And I was just my husband was doing his PhD in Haitian history at that time. And I was like, can we not see what's happening here? That enslaved guy, it's prisoners with jobs. It's a slave. Okay, this is state-backed slavery. You're like, wow, that slave is great. We want more of that. So that was in Florida. And I think that may not have been an isolated instance. And I think that may have made its way to the knowledge of the Florida state legislature, and they kind of we want to imprison experienced farm workers. And I suspect that at least some of that is going on. And I suspect the farm sector kind of knew that was an option and would like to see more of that. So if that's the thing you can vote for and you want, Trump may have been appealing to you. And to take it back to, so like making slavery great again is a part of what's going on here, right? So, I mean, that's a big win that a lot of folks got. Like, yeah, their undocumented workers are getting snapped up, but H-2A is getting a lot more easy to manipulate. And then also there's the possibility of prison labor. We don't even know what's going on with that because folks are just kind of disappearing out of the system. They're not being tracked when they're being sent to different facilities. So it's hard to even know what's going on with folks who are being kept in the let's abduct people off the street prison racket at the moment. So that's a benefit, potentially to the farm sector is, you may lose some of your workers, but I will say the thing you have to understand about labor and agriculture, farmers will always get the labor they want. One way or the other, they will get it. It's just a question of how. It's a question of how free those people are to leave. It's a question of how free those people are to report what's going on to the police. That's the only thing that's going to be different. The more crackdown there is on immigration, the harder it is for people to report it when their boss is doing something crazy and illegal. So just because there's a crackdown doesn't mean things are actually getting worse for farmers. I would simply point that out on that angle. Again, that's crops that are picked by hand. So that's not going to have any really bearing on commodity bulk grains, which are harvested by combine. It's a big machine you drive through. They call it a combine because it's a combined thresher, like a reaper and thresher. Like you cut the plant and then you beat the seeds out. You combine both of those activities in one machine. So it's a combine. So the farm labor stuff like kind of has no bearing on that. That is probably the single biggest part of the U.S. Depends on how you count it. Like in terms of acreage, definitely the biggest. In terms of money made, maybe not. But like, yeah, bulk grains that are harvested by machine. So that's a whole different set of stuff that we can now get into. I'm like, where to start? So kind of like how ICE is only one part of the immigration story, right? The soybean tariff market is only one part of the commodity grain story. So we're going to expand out to the rest of it that folks probably need to know about. Okay, so traditionally, the US is really focused on breadbasket staples, like corn, soy, wheat, meat, dairy, breadbasket staples. And then we export those because we can grow a lot of that. We're at a latitude where those make a lot of sense. We don't have a lot of tropical area. We don't have a lot of we can grow some sugarcane, but not a ton, right? So we focus on the breadbasket stuff. Typically, a lot of it, we export that, and then we import French wine and mangoes, tea, coffee, sugar, tropical things that we can't grow as much as we would like. That has traditionally been the US's focus. Over the last few decades, we've also moved to importing a lot of fruits and veggies, mostly from Mexico, sometimes from Canada, just depending on the season. Some of that is about seasonality, although again, you can build greenhouses. The seasons are not a ball and chain. They are kind of more of a suggestion at this point. It's not going to work for every single crop, but there's a lot of things that make sense to grow in greenhouses that we've just never really bothered to get into because that's just not how we roll. So that's been our traditional thing. Breadbasket staples, import other stuff. That is not working anymore. We are net importers. Actually, let me double check and make sure I don't misspeak.
Yeah, you see what I mean about actually using a source? That's not short form video. That's not what we get in the game. We're about confidently just spouting off.
Yeah, we're net importers of potatoes. We don't grow enough potatoes. We are net importers of ketchup. Okay, net importers of beer is not that surprising. People don't necessarily want to import U.S. beer. But also bread and bakery products, we're importing I don't know if we're net importers. It's a lot more than you would think. Yeah, we're pretty close on that. Yeah, so there's a lot of things that traditionally we have grown a lot of and exported, and we don't even do that anymore. We're importing potatoes. We're net importers of potatoes, ketchup. We're importing a lot of bread, bakery products. I think 20%. So that's a really high volume, low density, low value product that I don't know how it makes sense to import a fifth of your bread and bakery products. It just doesn't financially make sense. And yet that's where we're at. I would love to dig into that more and get into the mystery of it. But if you traditionally, your strength is in breadbasket stuff, you would not be importing a fifth of your bakery products. That's just crazy talk. So that's been happening. Let's see. I think the last year the US had a solid food export, we exported more than we imported, would have been 2014, I think.
Jeez.
And let me pull up one more chart. That is a link to a chart of soy exports that just been on the up and up for quite some time.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, from 20 million metric tons in 1964 to 120 in 2021.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, post-World War II and the Cold War era, a lot of our food exports were going up just because we're we feed the world. And then you see it kind of leveled off for a little bit, kind of in the 80s and 90s. And then it starts taking off again kind of around 2000 to 1995 to 2000-ish. And that is in large part because of China, right? So you remember hearing like people panic about like, China's got a bunch of people in the middle class and they're going to want to eat all this meat. That's what happened. You have a bunch of people who want more protein. They want meat. And so China buys a lot of meat from a lot of countries, like a lot of chicken and pork from the US historically. But also they want to raise some of their own. They're raising a lot of hogs there as well. But they don't have a lot of farmland to grow feed for the hogs. So they're importing that from other places. China also farms a lot of fish, and soy is a big part of the fish feed, right? So a lot of the soy that China's importing, it's not to make tofu, it's to feed animals. Also because like the soybeans that you use to make tofu, you'll see people say like, oh, Americans need to learn how to eat tofu. The soybeans that we're growing are not for tofu. They're for feeding the animals. So like, that's not even going to work. You can't pivot that quick. We already grew feed soybeans. So that's what's going on is China's importing a lot of soybeans to feed livestock because they can't grow that much themselves. They've got a country of over 1 billion people. And so it's kind of wild to me. Like there's definitely some things where geopolitically you're like, China's, acting like a country that wants to have power. How dare they? When most countries do that. Yes. And there's 1 billion people there, but when it comes to the food thing, like they have 1 billion people to feed. That's why they're buying a lot of soy. That's why they have stockpiles. You don't want to have a country of 1 billion people and suddenly not have food. That's actually kind of common sense.
These mysterious Oriental peoples, I just don't understand their, mystic philosophy that people need food to eat.
Yeah, I think it's very American to see a country that plans ahead and they're like, whoa, that's a plot. And there's other stuff geopolitically that I think is a real discussion there, but like this is literally just food. There's a lot of panic about, China's buying up all this farmland. And like I was running for office last year, and so people wanted to hear you speak on that. I'm like, look, guys, what's mostly going on? Like China bought Smithfield because they wanted pork. They're not after your property. If they wanted that, they would just be buying land. They bought Smithfield, and Smithfield had some farmland that was company property. And so they got that when they bought Smithfield, I think if there's a story at all there, it's that the US has not been keeping up on our agricultural, like all this stuff that we just talked about with how we're now a net importer of food. We have been leaving a big vacuum in our own food supply chain, and when you are bad at and when you kind of lag in running your own agricultural economy and farming your own land effectively, then someone else may buy your land. I mean, like that's not a plot. We left like when I was able to speak with people one-on-one about that, I was just like, listen, it's really easy to blame China, but the bottom line here is we were not managing a lot of our farm and economy very effectively.
Yeah.
You can't change other people's behavior, but you can change your own. And we decided it was easier to make an enemy and blame somebody than it was to do a better job. That's a lot of what's going on here.
Yeah, and so maybe just to tie off the whole, like, why did they vote for Trump? I mean, I think bailouts are part of it, right? You had, it seems to me the story I'm kind of been like tentatively putting together in my head. You have like MAGA culture war stuff. I think it's fair to say a lot of farmers are all in on that. Then you had we want to control our undocumented immigrant labor force even more, horribly, coercively. And then I think a lot of people just didn't believe or anticipate Trump's trade war would be quite so insane. Like they thought it would be kind of like it was in the first term, which, it was. There was a big disruption of the export of soybeans to China, but it's been way, way more aggressive and way more nonsensical this time. And then, of course, there's the bailouts that happened last term. And, do you think that was part of it? The farmers were thinking, well, if he blows up the whole export market, then we can just farm the mailbox instead and just go collect checks.
I mean, that's kind of how it works in normal years for a lot of the folks who are doing large grain acreage anyway. I'm coming from the fruit and veggie side of agriculture where we don't get subsidies. And I'll hear people say all the time, like, we don't get those and it's unfair. We should get subsidies. And I'm like, have you met the people who depend on subsidies? It does not do good things for them, like in terms of entrepreneurial spirit and understanding how the world around them works. I would not want that, actually. I really like about the fruit and veggie side of agriculture that we don't have that. Was it somebody said like massive wealth in terms of cognitive dysfunction is like the equivalent of getting kicked in the head by a horse repeatedly? I think subsidies do that in many ways. It doesn't lead you to, there's a lot of folks I don't think necessarily understand the link between cause and effect. I'm going to be honest with you. I'm just not seeing that in many cases. I won't say all, but in many cases. So to kind of tie off this whole soy discussion and link it back to this, because the the soy market was so huge. Like China just wants to buy a lot of soy. That's been going on for about 20 years. Normally what happens in a capitalism, right, is when the price for something goes up, like demand for soy goes up, so the price goes up. So normally what happens is a lot more people grow soy, so there's a lot more supply and the price goes back down. But China's demand for soy was growing so hard and so fast that you could not outrun them. And so the prices stayed high for 20 years. And like when you talk to people in agriculture, they'll never tell you, oh, we're in a 20-year high right now, because that just becomes the normal. And you have some year-to-year fluctuation on, fertilizer prices and seed prices and what you actually get paid. There's some year-to-year fluctuation. But if you look at it on the grand scale, we are at the end of a 20-year high in soy prices. And soy is, I will never say easy, because nothing in agriculture is easy, but out of all the crops, soy is like one of the dead easiest to grow. It's very resistant to a lot of normal weather issues. I'm not saying you can't kill a soy crop, but like, if you have we tend to have dry springs here in North Carolina, and soy is preferred for that reason, because you can plant a little bit later in the spring. So it avoids either spring flooding or spring droughts. Like it just tends to yield well almost no matter what. I don't say like no matter what happens, but it's a lot more resilient to weather issues than a lot of other crops. And there's just such a huge demand for it that you would always be able to sell it. And the price would be worth farming, right? When you have a 20-year high like that, again, it becomes people's normal. They forget that it's special. Also, if you can make a good amount of money, or like at least a livable amount of money, farming something that is dead simple, why would you do anything else? And so I think the US growing less and less of its own food and the soy story are actually the same story. We kind of dropped everything to grow more and more soy. We made ourselves into an export depot for China. And again, it's been a 20-year high. So I think a lot of folks in the farm industry you would think they'd have a memory, because your average farmer is 55, right? So you'd think there'd be a memory, but it's been long enough that people kind of forgot what it was like before that China will not always be there for you. And that didn't necessarily lead to a proper risk assessment when they were making their decisions. I think when a lot of outsiders who aren't in agriculture look at what happened, they're like, well, obviously he campaigned on deporting people. He campaigned on trade wars. Why would you do this? He also campaigned on, I'm not going to make you pay taxes. Most small family farmers in the US are millionaires with a 6-figure income. So you want to tell me that's not appealing to people? We're also at a point when a lot of the farmers, average age of farmer is pretty high, but sometimes you have a big wave of retirements. Like the baby boomers are getting ready to retire now. And you also have baby boomers who are farmers want to retire to the business. And also baby boomers who are not farmers want to retire to a nice place in the country. So at least here in North Carolina, that's a big part of why we've been leading the US in farmland loss for quite some time now. Is we're a big retirement destination. Like Florida's expensive now, so they're all going to come to North Carolina instead. And so if you own farmland in North Carolina, if you've been growing soy for a long time and prices aren't so good, you think you want to get out, you just sell to a different retiree into subdivisions or like small little farmettes. So I think you also have a lot of people in the farm sector who don't necessarily care what the farm sector, like how it performs over the next few years. They're worried about, when I sell my land, how many taxes do I have to pay? So there's like a big generational transition story that's playing into this as well. There's like a lot of factors feeding into each other. And there's also, just to a big extent, the farm economy has just always been so insulated by bailouts and like layers and layers and layers of protection and safety nets that a lot of folks, for as much as people talk about, my farm is struggling, this bad weather happened, yada, yada, for as much as that happens, the reason they say that is because when farmers complain about their problems, they get money. And so when that keeps happening, what do you learn? Do you learn that you need to make good choices to take care of yourself, or do you learn complain and you'll get money?
That's the end of the preview, folks. As usual, we like to mention that this podcast is sponsored by the American Prospect Magazine. So if you want to listen to the whole thing, you can subscribe at $5 a month. If you want that plus a free subscription to the website, plus the opportunity for a steeply discounted print subscription, you can do that if you so wish at $10 a month. And otherwise, thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.